episode number 8. Today's episode is dedicated to the fine people at drumchatter.com. They are doing some great things, pulling in all these resources from the internet and kind of sticking it in one place. And I love what they're doing. So if you're seeing my episode for the first time, I just want to throw out who I am and what I'm trying to do. My name is Charlie Nesmith, and I run a website called marimbology.com. The whole purpose of my website is, threefold. Number one is to compile a massive amount of information on the marimba. I list all the manufacturers that I could find in approximate prices, how to wrap mallets, all the different blogs on the marimba that I could find. Pretty much anything that has to do with the instrument is listed in a database on my website. I also run Sight Reading of the Week, so for your intermediate players who want to keep that skill fresh, they can get on every week and check out a piece of marimba sight reading and a piece of snare sight reading and just kind of keep that skill fresh. And the third part of my site is I run these eccentric monthly videos on how to play the marimba. And they're really aimed at beginning players who either don't have access to a good teacher or who can't afford to take lessons. So they can get on my site, check out my videos, and get a good idea of where they're going. So that said, let's get to today's episode, the Burton Grip.
The Burton Grip was developed by vibraphonist Gary Burton in the 50s and 60s. This grip's power nearly equals that of playing with two mallets, and it became really popular with jazz vibe players everywhere who sought to cut through the ensemble, yet still play with the four-part harmonies that you could do with four mallets. Although most marimbas today use Stevens or traditional cross grip, there are still a few players out there who use Burton. I'll put a comprehensive list on my website so you can check them out.
Okay, now let's talk about the grip. If you haven't checked out episode number 7 yet, you should check it out because I give a basic overview of all the four mallet grips. So today though, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details. So to set up for Burton Grip, in the right hand, there's two ways you can think about this. The first way is you can think about holding a mallet like you regularly would, and then you're going to take the other mallet and put it in between your palm and that mallet. And it looks something like this. So the outside mallet is sandwiched in between the inner mallet and your palm. Or another way you can do that is lay your mallets down on the marimba like this. Take the outer mallet, place it on top of the inner mallet, and then you can grab just like this, stick your finger in between, and pick it up like that. And that is the basics of the grip. Now there are two different main variations on the Burton Grip. There's the classic Burton Grip that the man himself uses, but there's also this kind of Stevens traditional cross grip Burton hybrid grip that most marimba players are using today when they use Burton Grip. So first, I'm going to discuss the classic grip, and then later on, I'll get into the hybrid grip. All right, let's talk about interval changing. Now in your bass position, your pinky finger is wrapped around your inside mallet here, and your ring finger and your middle finger are kind of holding down that outer mallet to keep it in place here. Now when we want to get to a smaller interval, what we're going to do is three things. Number one, we're going to take our index finger and stick it out. We're going to take our pinky finger and move it up. And then we're going to take our thumb and push that inner mallet close to the outer mallet. So now you can see that my pinky finger and my ring finger are together. My index finger is sitting on top of the inside mallet, not the outside mallet, but the inside mallet. And the thumb is pushed over. So here's what that looks like. Now the wide interval changes are a lot more complicated, but still pretty manageable. Basically what we're going to do is the thumb is going to get out of the way. The index finger is going to push down on the inner mallet, and the two smaller fingers are going to pull up like this. And then the thumb's going to sit on the inside, but the thumb's not actually doing anything. It's just getting out of the way. All of the locomotion is done with the index finger and the two smaller fingers. Looks something like this. So at this wide interval, that's going to be your octave. If you need to get higher than an octave, you can take your index finger and push the outer mallet out like that. But you want to try to avoid that when possible because it's really hard to get it back without throwing it back over there. Because there's no fingers or anything that can pull it back over. You just kind of have to throw it. So you want to try to avoid that when possible. This is usually the largest interval that you want to get. Now while these interval changes may be a little bit awkward at first, it only takes maybe a week to kind of get them down. All you have to do is sit on the couch, or if you're in the car driving somewhere, sit in the car or whatever, and just take two mallets in your hands and slowly go from the wide position, check your fingers, go back to the neutral position, then to the small position, make sure your pinky is out now, then back, make sure your pinky's back in. You just kind of go back and forth between the two, and eventually it's second nature. Now I will say that if you're doing this a lot in a song, like really fast, your outer mouth's going to have the tendency to slowly slide down. And that's why a lot of players use shafts that are thicker, or they wrap some kind of tape around their mallets so that that sliding action doesn't occur. But we'll get to more on that in a little bit. Okay, let's talk about the mechanics of how a double vertical stroke works. At the bass neutral interval of a fourth or fifth, it's not going to be unlike playing with two mallets. It's going to be very similar. Okay, and then we get to the smaller interval, like maybe a third or so, it's going to be extremely similar to playing with two mallets, except that your finger is going to be a little extended. Now, when we get to the octave, that's when things get a little squirrely, because in the classic Burton grip, your hand looks like this. Now, if you notice, if I want these mallets to hit at the same time at the same height, I'm taking my hand and I'm more or less doing a rotation with it. Because if I do an up-down motion with my hand, then the outer mallet is going to be a lot higher than the inner mallet. So I have to kind of do this like sideways rotation deal to get them to be the same volume. And that's where the hybrid grip changes that up a little bit. We'll get to more on that in a second. But to practice these, you can really use any of the Stevens exercises from his book that deal with interval changes between the major chord and the octaves and things like that. You know, you might want to start with something like this. Now, one thing you're going to notice is when you get to your smaller interval changes and you start playing those double stops, sometimes you may hear your mallet shafts click together while you're playing. And there's a couple solutions to that, but the easiest fix, the easy solution, is to play with a mallet with a bigger shaft. For example, I have some IP 240s here, pretty standard mallet, and here I have the new Nebojsa-Chivkovich mallets. And as you can see, Nebojsa's mallets are considerably thicker than the IP 240s. And if I'm playing like an interval of a second with these, a lot of times I'm going to hear that clicking sound right here. It kind of gets on my nerves after a while. So if you switch to a rattan shaft, it's going to be wider. Or if you can find birch mallets that are just a little bit wider, it'll prevent that click from happening, which could be great. Because I have been in a couple performances where someone's like, hey, you know, I noticed this, you remember making a funny sound in that piece? And I was like, funny sound? And I went and looked at the recording, and it was the shafts clicking together. And I just kind of tuned it out after a while. But to fix that, you know, get bigger shafts, or even if you have the smaller shafts, and you want to wrap them with some sort of stick, not stick tape, but like some sort of like foam. Like I think ProMark makes some foam for sticks. You can wrap that around there, and it'll help prevent that clicking sound.